Good morning or good afternoon to everyone joining us, and welcome to our webinar on evolving practices in enterprise risk management. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. As a reminder, audio is available through your computer or through dial-in, but we do have all lines muted. So with that said, we certainly welcome your questions, and you could submit those or your comments at any time throughout the webinar. And we're going to address those questions during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Also, we'll have a link to the recording sent to the registrants through email within a few days. So without further ado, this is what we plan to talk about today. And let me just briefly introduce myself. This is Rachele Collins with APQC. And so we're going to begin with a little bit of background and context setting about the benchmarking study that we recently concluded entitled Evolving Practices in Enterprise Risk Management. We'll talk about the key findings from the study related to governance, practices, creating a culture for ERM program measurements and benchmarks, and then we'll have some supporting examples from some of the case study interviews that we conducted as part of the project. And we'll conclude the session today with some recommended resources and time for Q&A. So I wanted to set the stage and give some background about the project, and then I'm going to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Paul Walker, but just to provide some background and context about this study. Why the study? What was the purpose? So the goal of the project was to understand the current practices and tools for enterprise risk management at organizations, and if these practices are evolving in light of the pandemic. What we've been hearing from our members and customers is that they were very interested in the topic of risk, as you can imagine, given everything that we've been through over the last year or so now with the pandemic. And this project is actually our 5th benchmarking study on the topic of ERM. The last one we conducted around 2014, so we definitely thought it was time for an update. But we were thrilled as part of this project to partner with Dr. Paul Walker from St. John's University. And he really helped us in terms of thought leadership throughout the project and design of the data collection instruments, guiding the study, as well as connecting us with some excellent organizations to interview. I do want to point out a couple of other things about the project. It was both a quantitative and qualitative study. So by that, we had both case studies as well as a survey. And we did that on purpose so that we could get a variety of industries and organizational sizes to participate in the project. I'm on the previous slide. Yeah, thanks. And then we also deliberately intended to interview organizations in different industries and of different sizes, as well as recognize leaders in enterprise risk management. So you can see in terms of the survey component there, we had about 229 survey participants. These were global participation. This is across a number of different industries. And what we're going to do in the remainder of the session is talk about the results. But I did want to thank those organizations on the line today who participated in the survey. And I also wanted to take just a moment to give some special thanks to the case study organizations that we interviewed. Those organizations included AARP, Chillicothe Municipal Utilities out of Missouri, Highmark Health, the IRS, a large global bank that was a blinded case study, a mid-sized utility company also blinded, On Semiconductor, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Thank you so much for your participation. All right, so now we can go to this one. So again, continuing with a little bit of additional context setting before we get into the findings and the results. This is more about the participants in the survey. And one of the first questions that we wanted to get at with the survey was understand how mature organizations were or are in terms of the stage that they had reached with respect to ERM and how long that they'd been engaging in ERM. And I'm sure that everyone attending the session today is in a different phase of their personal organizational journey. But what we saw from the survey results was that in terms of the stage that respondents assessed themselves at with regards to maturity, that's the chart on the left, most of them said that they're relatively mature when it comes to ERM. And you can see there that the majority said that they have at least defined processes in place for ERM. What that means is that they have an established or a common language and an established leader, but only a little more than a quarter said that they have optimized their processes. And that really indicates that the participants at least feel that they have further opportunity for quantifying and visualizing the risks and to further leverage ERM for competitive advantage. Now, on the right, we also asked in terms of how long participants had reported that they have been engaged in ERM. And again, you can see about 3/4 of them said that they've been involved in ERM for at least 3 years. Another third there have been engaging in ERM for 5 or more years. Maybe not surprisingly, when we looked at the data by size, we saw that survey respondents that are larger in terms of size said that they've been engaging in ERM for a longer period of time. So that gives you a little bit of an idea in terms of who participated, their industries, kind of what stage that they were at with respect to ERM. I'd like to, at this point, pass the presentation over to our guest speaker for today, who's going to talk about the findings from the project in terms of governance and practices and processes. Let me introduce him. We have with us today Dr. Paul Walker. He is the Executive Director of the Center for Excellence in ERM at St. John's University. He holds a PhD from the University of Colorado Boulder and a BBA from the University of Texas, Arlington. He is a CPA and a member of the AICPA, the IMA, the IIA, and FEI. And he has professional work experience in banking and public accounting, as an auditing and fraud expert witness, and as a consultant. He's also published in a number of prestigious journals, such as the Journal of Accountancy, Financial Executive, Decision Sciences, and other journals as well. And he is a recognized thought leader in ERM. So without further ado, I will pass the presentation over to Dr. Walker to discuss the study findings in more detail.
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. And just checking, give me a little feedback. I want to make sure you can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine, Dr. Walker. Thank
Great.
you.
Well, thank you for everyone for joining today. If you don't know, there's almost 200 of you that have signed on to this webinar. So thank you for listening in for a little bit and letting us share a little bit about what we've been working on. Again, I want to thank everyone that participated in the survey, and especially the case companies. There's so many great people working in the field of enterprise risk management that are trying to share and not only make their own practices better, but help others get better in this ERM journey as well. And again, on the admin side, you can post questions down there in the chat room. It's on the right-hand side of my screen. I'm not as familiar with GoToWebinar as I am some of the others, but you should be able to find that. Let us know if you can't, but we're going to be able to get to the questions at the end. You are also welcome to send me an email later if you would like to some clarification. I'm happy to do that. And also to let you know, in case I talk too fast or skip over something, Rachel's going to talk about some resources at the end and where you can get more information and find more about what we worked on. So just trying to make sure that you're taken care of before we jump into some of the material. So as you can tell, I am a professor in this area. Yeah, we actually have college degrees in this area. My PhD is in accounting, but I sort of transitioned into enterprise risk management. We have an MS and an MBA, which is now online. If you want to go back to college now and get a degree in this area, we would welcome you. I like to think we're the best enterprise risk management degree in the world. I have good evidence that we are as well, so you could come join us in New York. As you could probably tell, I'm not from New York. I actually live in Virginia. I also grew up in Texas, so I may not sound like a New Yorker, but my New Yorker friends say that I do talk as fast as them, so I apologize. I will do my best to slow down a little bit today. So you're welcome to contact me. I also run a Center for Excellence in Enterprise Risk Management, just to let you know, and we do sort of these ERM leader invitation-only events twice a year. My next one's coming up on April 22nd on ESG and ERM alignment. Well, let's get into the material. It's amazing to me to watch the journey of enterprise risk management. And here's sort of what amazes me about it. It is I have spoken to 40-year-old tech billionaires, CEOs, of Fortune 100 companies, chairman of the board of the largest investment bank in the world, U.S. ambassadors to Great Britain, nuclear scientists, four-star generals, the Prince of Jordan. It's just unbelievable. And the common thread in all of that is enterprise risk management. It's somewhat of a young topic compared to all the other topics out there, but it's incredibly important. And all your friends through COVID are now think that they're risk experts. And those of you who are on the webinar today know that they've got a long way to go, because you and I are still on this journey. But I've noticed over the decades in this area that it's been growing and developing. People are getting way more sophisticated. So this is why I think it's a good time for APQC to stop and benchmark and sort of say, well, where are we? Let's level set and see where companies are. But some of the companies that I know, and some of you, again, that are with us today know that you're pushing the envelope. Why? Because once you get it started, you want to get better. You realize there are ways to get better. There's additional levels of sophistication to add. And I would also argue, and this is why I'm glad that you're here today, that the expectations for managing risk have gone up dramatically, whether it's New York Stock Exchange or SEC rules in the US, or whether it's actual laws coming out of Congress, all the way around the world, in almost every country in the world, they are raising the bar with the expectations over managing risk. I've got a call this afternoon with somebody in India, had a call last week with somebody in Saudi Arabia. So I've spoken in Singapore to South Korean executives and all over North America. It's a great area. It's an exciting area, and we're nowhere near done. So let's get into what we learned in this particular study. What we're going to do is look at sort of the structure that people told us they have. Rachel gave us a little bit about that. Then we're going to dig into some processes, and then we're going to talk about, well, how do people sort of benchmark or know if ERM is working? So that's kind of the big picture outline that we're going to go through here. First, just to continue with some of the basics that Rachel talked about earlier, most people now that participated in the survey, you can see the numbers there on the bottom, a sample size of over 200 on the left, 227 actually. Do you have a core ERM team? And the answer is yes. So what was never there before, it was just somebody was given the task. And by the way, I still hear that today. I had 2 phone calls recently where somebody said, oh my gosh, I just got told I'm in charge of ERM. I don't even have a team. Well, once you get it going, as you can see, 96% do have a core ERM team. It's not just a side job for someone. And you can see on the right that most of the time where they reside organizationally, headquarters or finance, or even in strategic planning. So again, the quick picture is people are building teams, they're setting it up in headquarters or finance, but how many people do they have? Well, in this sample, again, about 200 participated for this particular question, and the median number is 5. So we see 4, we see 8. It's gonna take a lot of work if you're practicing in this area. You know it's gonna take a lot of work. So it's helpful to have a team. You're gonna see in just a moment how some people leverage the team and then bring in others to help them with that team. I know some organizations that have 20 or 30 on their ERM team. I know some that have 1. Right, but what you can see is in this sample, the median number was about 5. Well, where does that person report? This is very important where you report, because as you know, certain levels of executives have their hands on the money, resources, data, connections. They give you the authority, they give you the power, they give you the freedom to get the job done. So don't take this lightly. Is there a right answer? I don't think so, but the higher up in the organization and the more connected you are to the high levels of the C-suite and the board, clearly is going to make a difference. And we'll come back to that comment in just a moment as well. But where are they reporting? Look at that, 9% CEO. So if you're launching ERM or you're rethinking it, maybe make sure you get to the CEO or the CFO's office, which you can see again on the right-hand side is 29%. And then you see also some chief risk officer, 31%, chief accounting officer, 11%, and the head of internal audit, 10% down there. So they are setting it up, they are getting staff, they are setting up the reporting lines. When the SEC wrote their rule on reporting lines, they made a very big deal about disclosing your reporting lines. So in the public company arena, it's incredibly important to tell your stakeholders about the reporting lines. As some of you can see why that makes a lot of sense. It makes a big difference where you report. And again, the public company arena, the SEC emphasizes that you share that information. Well, what about governance and who's going to be the sponsor? Well, as you probably know, if you've been doing this for more than an hour. You can't do it on your own, right? You're going to have that support. And on the right-hand side, look at those big numbers, right? The 24%. Some people have board sponsorship. 41% have CEO sponsorship. That's going to make a big difference as well. And then 23% told us that they have CFO executive sponsorship. So it's going to help quite a bit. If you have a higher level of sponsorship, again, it's going to make implementing and practicing ERM work a lot better. Now, what about the governance mechanism? So you get the sponsorship, you get your reporting lines, hopefully you get a staff. What else are you going to do? Well, you're going to try and set it up. Like I'm working on a paper right now on what is risk governance, what does board risk oversight look like? And on the right-hand side, this is absolutely necessary. You can't just set it up at the board level, but you got to have some executive champions. Somebody's got to be there to stand up and support you. It also helps in some, but not all organizations. You got to have business level or business unit champions. I know some companies that have country champions or product champions. So you could take this down to certain levels and spread it out a little bit. So executive level, business level, product or country champions, executive risk committees. Again, all these are in the low to upper 40s on what companies are reporting that they're doing. And then eventually somebody's got to own it. And we see 33% on the risk owner. So get a sponsor, build it up, get the support, get the executive champions, executive level risk committees, and those can be incredibly valuable. And in fact, I don't think it comes out on the slides, but one of the things that will come out in the studies, that's why I'd encourage you to listen to those resources that Rachel's going to talk about and read some of these studies, because there's so much more rich detail in there. But one of the organizations that we interviewed uses those executive level risk committees to link ERM to strategy in a rather unique, clever way. Some good friends of mine at HHS are doing that. I love the way that they sort of tie that into the executive level committee and strategic initiatives. There's so many smart, clever people practicing in enterprise risk management. And in some ways it's fun because it's not like accounting where you have to know FASBs and rules and stuff. It's be as creative as you can, right? Be scientific, get data, right? Be sophisticated, but you can also be very creative in this area. So I hope you have a little bit of fun with it, because sometimes it's a little challenging. This is how the IRS sets up their governance. So if you didn't know this, your IRS has a chief risk officer, they have an ERM director, they have advisors, and they have ERM liaison, which is becoming a common method in a lot of companies, because you will quickly figure out, I can't do it. I need someone to help me with this. So you get people in the business units and in other areas of the business to be your sort of your foot soldiers or your ears, people to get out there and talk to the business because they're part of the business. So I'm actually working on an article right now that says, well, I have a chief risk officer for the country, not just for the IRS. So a few people tell me that's too political and they don't want to publish it. And I'm not a political person, it's just how I feel, right? But this is a great example. The IRS set up the infrastructure. It's very important to set the infrastructure up. Well, how are you going to leverage? How are you going to get buy-in? I do a lot of speaking around the country, and I mentioned also around the globe. And I think a lot of times the reason people invite me to speak is they're trying to use me to help get buy-in. So it's important to get them to understand. The reason this slide is so important is because your leaders probably didn't understand what enterprise risk management was until the last couple of years, right? It hasn't been on the laws that long. It hasn't been required that long. I mean, it has for a little bit, but not as long as some of the other things that are out there. So buy-in is necessary for them to get it, for them to see that you're trying to help them be more successful. You're not trying to just tell them, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. As a reminder, again, ERM is trying to help them be more successful. As the former chairman of COSO used to always say to me, doesn't everybody want to meet more of their objectives more of the time? Professor, that's all we're trying to do. So we got to get buy-in. We got to get their support. And how are people doing it? They're communicating. I love that. So let's talk to senior leaders. Let's find a way to get in front of them, whether it's by email and meetings, etc. We're having formal risk and education training. Look at that, over half are doing that. So this is a sample of 228. So somewhere over that are actually saying we're going to do formal risk education and training. We're having meetings with the risk owners, 51%. We're having risk summits. Yay, that's great. Come to my summits, come visit what we're doing as well. One of my board members for my ERM board that we run, actually uses a snapshot that he's on my center board, and when he walks into his board meeting, this is a Fortune 200 company, I got such a kick out of this. When he walks into his board meeting, he shows them that he is on my ERM Summit board. So it's a way to show his board that he's not just somebody practicing enterprise risk management, but he's a leader. He's plugged in. He knows what he's doing. He's growing his network. So don't be shy about selling your skill set, your connections. For those of you who are in this study, the 8 companies, give that to your leaders. Let them know that you've been recognized as a leading organization out there. Let them know your progress as well. Find a way to, what's that old phrase, toot your own horn? I don't even know where we got that phrase, but I like it, I guess. So communications, education, have meetings, have summits, have champions, have them embedded into the business. We saw that earlier. And have an internal ERM site. And even if you want to play some games, I don't have a problem with that. I think that can be very valuable as well. Just some examples of how people are trying to get buy-in. The one from the right is from the IRS, right? We're all risk managers. So little ways to connect and communicate. Probably want to get a graphic designer if you're trying to just do some of that stuff. I think that helped quite a bit. Some of the organizations you see in here that we mentioned earlier do these tear sheets, these ways, these sort of intellectual, thought-provoking ideals to help the conversation and guide the conversation. Lunch and Learns. AHS has these COPs, community of practice. I know several organizations that have started doing that as well. Strategic Risk Partners at Highmark. IRS is doing a lot of things, executive committees, working groups. They have templates. They have decision-making risk templates as well. They do a lot of really cool stuff. They're very aggressive. Progressive there as well. And then onsemi that we mentioned earlier as well is really a leader. They also have risk champions. They're really good about getting enterprise risk management embedded out into their global operations. So those are just several examples of trying to get buy-in that will make your job so much better if you could just do that. Well, what are some of the particular practices and processes and things that we saw? Well, let's take a look. And again, I hope I'm not going too fast, but the chat questions are down there and we're gonna save room for chatting at the end as well. This next question is one that I get a lot, and it's, well, how many do I report? Well, notice the question on your left is, how many risks do the executives monitor, right? So the question isn't how many do you have in your register, but how many do the executives monitor? And the answer is, you can see right in the middle, about 40% say, well, 11 to 20, and 27% say 6 to 10, and 18% say 21 to 30. In the board risk oversight risk governance project I'm actually working on right now, we're getting the same numbers. So once you get up to the C-suite into the board, it's going to be a smaller pool, right? I think it's going to be rare that someone's going to walk into the CEO's office or the boardroom with 200 risks, because that's probably not going to work. It doesn't mean that you may not have data analytics and big data and be monitoring all those. In fact, you might. But at the executive level, it's just not going to work that way. You're going to narrow it down to what people call the big risk, the enterprise risk, et cetera, with just one quick caveat. Some people have said to me that they feel like COVID has taught us many things, one of which is that maybe in the world of ERM, one of the mistakes we might have made in the past, but hopefully we won't in the future, is we always want to go to the boardroom with the big risk, the high impact, high likelihood. So if you're doing a map, you'd say the upper right-hand side, right? But those low probability, high impact risks, or high impact, low probabilities, one of my ERM colleagues calls them HILPs, high impact, low probability. And so what I'm hearing several people say is, we might need to rethink some of those, given that COVID has sort of caught a few companies off guard, because those high impact, low probabilities can really devastate your entire organization. And as we all know, even the world, as we're just past really the 1-year anniversary. So we take these things a little bit more seriously now. So I'd encourage you to use COVID to sort of step up your game and get more resources if you can. And then on the right, well, how often are you assessing risk? This is actually quite surprising to me, because you can see 5% say annually, but almost half are saying quarterly, another 45% are saying monthly. So people are getting to the point to where they're saying we need to assess risk on a more regular basis than we have in the past, excuse me. And even on the far right-hand side, 14% are saying dynamically or in real time. That's amazing. I'm doing a project for COSO right now on the concept of agile and ERM, and what does that mean if the corporation goes agile? Or what does it mean if the ERM team wants to go agile? How does ERM and the practice of ERM change? And how does the role of ERM change? And you're seeing this on this slide already. So again, as I said at the beginning, a lot of great things, cool stuff are happening in enterprise risk management. I tell my graduate students all the days, some of which are young and some of which are working professionals like you, there are so many billion-dollar opportunities for new consulting and new solutions to ERM that if you're a creative, dynamic, entrepreneurial person, I would say jump in, because a lot of ERM has not been solved. I know a few people that are trying it, but trust me, it has not been solved. So there's a lot of opportunities in this area as well. On this next slide, what we did was we just stopped and said, well, I wonder, without you telling us what your top 10 or 20 risks are, which categories are they in? And as you know, a lot of companies like to categorize their risk. There are many reasons to do that. Perhaps one of the most obvious ones is COSO categorized them in one of their thought papers in 2006 and in their original framework before 2006. So people like to categorize. Perhaps a better reason is you need to know who to assign the risk to, right? So if you categorize them, you could say, oh, well, if that's a financial risk, we're going to give that to the CFO's office, maybe the controller, maybe the audit committee. I got this question just last week from someone. Well, what do I do with my strategic risk? Well, I think the answer is CEO's office and the entire board. If it's a real strategic risk, that goes to the board and the CEO. In fact, many people would say the CEO is the by default chief risk officer, especially in the area of strategy. But anyway, you can see the numbers. It's actually quite spread out. So 15% said, well, 15% of my risk are strategy, 15% operation, 15% finance, 10% cyber, 10% external or macro. We're going to come back to that in just a little bit. 10% reputation. Interesting. There's a lot of controversy on ERM about what you do with reputation risk. But you can see it's actually quite spread out. But then we asked them, well, what about strategy? And what about this strategic risk? And what are you doing in this area? And you can see here that, I'm going to back up one more time just to make you pay attention and keep you awake, hopefully, right? So if you're going, oh, wait, he went backwards. Yes, I did. So keeping me awake as well. Just to remind you, on the left-hand side, we said, or you said, I should say, that 15% of your risk are strategic. But look at this. You spend a lot of your time on strategic risk. And I would encourage that. I think that's fantastic. Why? Because you know all those studies if you haven't seen them. Seems there's 4 or 5 consulting firms that have them. And they always say, well, strategy is the biggest killer of value. I agree. I have one entire graduate class going on right now on strategic risk analysis. And it's showing up in slides 17 and 18, despite the fact that strategy is only 15% of our risk. We spend a lot of time on it. Why? Because that's the really big ones. That's the ones where everybody loses their job, right? Because we missed the change in the business model. We missed the big strategic risk out there. So spend time on strategy. There are a lot of ways. We didn't go into it too much in this study, but you can get way more sophisticated in the strategy area. There's an argument that's been around for at least 10 years, maybe longer, that says, well, what do you do with ERM? Do you build it in or do you bolt it on? I don't know. Some people say both. Do you do top down or bottoms up? Some people say both. So you're kind of seeing this in this particular slide. Where do you integrate ERM? Is it just something on the side? Well, this is good news. So this should encourage you. Take this back to your executives and say, well, hey, look, 41% of companies are integrating it into data and technology and business units. The whole cyber risk stuff is an incredible area, very deep, incredibly important, but it's not a standalone risk. It is connected to all these other risks and needs to be thought of also under the ERM umbrella. So please don't do that as a standalone only. Don't manage your risk in silos, because one of the big benefits of ERM is seeing the connections to the risk. So just as a reminder, Markowitz won a Nobel Prize for this idea, and I hope you're practicing it in your retirement plan, right? You need to have your investments in a portfolio. What's the other way to say it? Don't put all your eggs in a basket. So don't practice silo risk management. Please remember that. So you can see up at the top, almost half are integrated into strategy. That actually surprised me. I wish I could explain that one with a little bit more detail. 46% operations, 43% finance, 36% internal audit. So what this should tell you is that if you're doing ERM today, it's wise to stop and listen to your colleagues at your organization in those areas at the top and say, hey, what are you already doing? Find out what they're doing, even in compliance. Find out what risks they already know, what their processes are. You don't have to launch everything from scratch. You may be able to rely on a lot that is already there. That's quite common. The ones that surprise me are the innovation, 27%, and the social media, 8%. So the reason innovation surprises me is that's your bread and butter. That's your future product. That's your future revenue. That's huge. That's dramatically important. I spoke to a tech company just last week who said innovation is my #1 risk. In our industry, if we're not constantly innovating, we're in huge trouble. So I would almost call innovation a strategic risk. So that one surprises me that it's 27%, whereas when we use the phrase strategy, it's 49%. So there may be some explanation there that we just need to flush out a little bit. The other one that surprises me is down at the bottom is the social media. I mean, you saw the picture earlier. You might think I'm old. Maybe I am. I don't really know. I think I look much younger than that picture, by the way. But in this world of social media, which for the record, I am not on, I don't do Twitter, I don't do Facebook, I just don't do all that stuff. My students say I'm young, but I'm still not into all of that social media stuff. But here's what you and I know. It can wipe you out, right? It can escalate things so rapidly. So I'm a little surprised that only 8% are connecting with social media. That would make me a little bit nervous if I were the CEO or on the board, and I would want a little bit more communication or connection between what's happening with social media, public relations, even crisis management, and ERM. I would want to know more about how that particular area is working. And the other one that we didn't ask about, so Rachel, I apologize for not thinking about this at the time, but we didn't ask it, and it would be great to know to the extent ERM is integrated with ESG, because as you know, a lot of ERM people are getting big pressure right now on ESG. And what is the role of ERM? We know the disclosures. We know Larry Fink and BlackRock and others are pressuring. We know activist shareholders are pressuring. And I'm just going to say to you, it's my opinion, that if you haven't been asked about how ERM links with the ESG, you will be, because it seems to be something that's coming towards us without question. This one is interesting to me as well. Well, what are you doing? What exactly are some of the techniques that are out there? And you can see a variety of those. These, I would say, are still somewhat traditional. So brainstorming, business impact, cost benefit, risk register, surveys, decision tree, workshop, scenario analysis, some doing probabilistic modeling. I love that kind of stuff. You got to have data, but I'm a data kind of guy. Bow ties, Markovs, interviews as well. So you're seeing a lot of different techniques. And here's just one example. This was, again, such great companies that participated with us, and thanks to all of them. But my good friends at Highmark, I just love the way they're pushing buttons and challenging and really raising the bar on ERM. And they told us about how they started rethinking that, wait a minute, the future isn't singular, it's plural. I love that quote. And so they're really starting to explore and look for ways to do risk assessment and other things better. And they told us about this book they found, The Flaw of Averages. Cute title, right? I always write boring titles. One of these days I'm gonna write a book with a really clever title like that one. So they're trying to push the boundaries a little bit. And as I said earlier, I would encourage you to do that as well. I think it's great. Find some data, find what the appetite, I don't mean risk appetite, but find what your executives need to help them make better decisions, to manage the organization better. And so they're just blazing trails out there. So I think this is great. HHS is also doing some really cool stuff. AARP as well. My good friends there, and Onsemi, my good friend there as well. He's doing some great stuff. He's doing these pre-mortems. He's doing these scenario planning on emerging risks. So again, I'd encourage you to step outside a little bit and start pushing some buttons and try and get better. And I said it earlier, but I want to mention here again now, but HHS is doing a good job in a lot of areas. I really like just my personal preference, their strategic initiative stuff. I just thought that was so cool. How are people looking at data? Not a lot of surprises on this one, but you can see they're using maps, matrices, dashboards, heat maps, risk scorecards, report cards, risk radars. I was in an ERM benchmarking network last week, and it's the first time I've heard anybody say this, but it was a Fortune probably 200 company, and she said, my board decided they want numbers on everything. Like, wow, so they don't want low, medium, high. They want a dollar figure on everything. I haven't heard that very often. In fact, I think that may be the first time I've heard that. But so just be aware this is kind of the baseline, and your board and your leadership may want something different. This is the one that AARP uses. Congratulations to them. I like this one. I think it's one of the better ones out there, and you can see it. It's a sample risk scorecard framework, so they've got the risk, even the category, what's the residual impact, likelihood, velocity. God, those are also important. Part of me thinks after COVID, maybe we ought to be thinking a little bit more about robustness and resiliency as well. That's just my personal opinion. But notice that AARP, my good friend Joe Pugh there, also has mitigation effectiveness, and then the risk outlook. Who's the owner? What's the board oversight committee? That's just great stuff. What are the key mitigation efforts? What's the KRI there? If you haven't gotten into KRIs, I love key risk indicators. There's some companies that are really blazing trails in that area as well. And then some key takeaways over on the right. So I think Joe's done a great job there in trying to show people what are some good scorecards, but let's just show you some others. So this is on semi. Mike has done such a great job there. This is very clever. If you haven't met Mike, he's a very clever guy. So notice what he's doing is he's using the risk map to point out that in areas where they're risk averse, right? So if we're risk averse, we need to drive the risk to a lower level. Like, don't take that risk. But in areas where we're risk tolerant, why aren't we taking more risk? So that's amazing to me. I love the way Mike thinks and says, wait a minute, we could be taking more risk. If I remember correctly, Mike's got a background in engineering, so he's good at thinking through both sides of the equation. So again, I'm just going to back up. You're seeing some good scorecards here. You're seeing some different versions of maps out here. And then let's talk about what's happening after COVID-19, because I think, again, this is fascinating data. I'll let you decide. Maybe put us in the chat question and let us know what one big change you're making, or send me an email. I would love to know what changes you're making. As I said, I'm seeing a big push in the ESG area. I'm seeing more big pushes in the strategy area. But when we ask the survey participants, the numbers are really staggering if you think about it. So we specifically said, tell us where your efforts are going to increase as a result of the pandemic. And look at the first one and the third one. A lot more effort. I just want to say that one more time. A lot more effort. These are not small numbers on action plan development and action plan testing. In a post-COVID world, if I were on the board reviewing your action plans, I would be asking way more questions than I ever did, because people got caught so off guard with the links to we weren't ready. We didn't understand the connections to other risks. We didn't really understand resilient. We didn't really understand continuity. Some of those old-fashioned concepts really coming into play here. We hadn't really tested. We made a lot of assumptions on these action plans, and we really paid for it because we just flat out weren't ready. Even in my own industry in higher ed, my business school dean pointed out the other day, wow, never in the history of my university have we been so susceptible to cyber risk. She said, if the internet goes down right now, all classes end. Whereas last year, if the internet went down, well, you still walk in class, and maybe we can't email and do other things, but it's amazing how COVID has changed so many things. And let me go down to the fourth one there. That one's interesting. Again, not small numbers. So 76%, 50 and 26 on risk identification. Risk identification efforts are going up. So you want to think very carefully about, are you sure that you've identified the right risk? And then I'm going to go up, because the other one that's connected to that is the second line that you see in front of you, unknown risk. And look at that number, 69% say they're going to increase their effort in unknown risk. And that's an interesting area. There are certain parts of the world, if you don't know this, where you are legally mandated to search for emerging risk. We don't have that law or that requirement or that suggestion in North America, but in some parts of the world they do. You're legally mandated to look for emerging, perhaps even unknown risk. So, but in this particular sample, people are telling us we got to get better at risk identification. We got to get better at searching for those unknown risks. I'm going to suggest to you that unknown risk, that's much more difficult. That takes a lot of effort to try and figure out and flush that out. It's a different tool set, because if it's an unknown risk, you don't just send out a survey, right? It's going to take a lot more thinking on your part, and a slightly different approach. And then finally, people are going to get better at assessing the risk, and I'll show you why. I think it comes up on the very next slide. Well, it's going to come up in just a moment. Yeah. So get better at assessing risk as well. Excuse me. Well, what are the benefits? What are the measurements? What are the results? Well, gee, there are a lot. Look at this. Use this to go back to your board and say, this is why we do ERM, right? We look at the impact on results. We look at cost measures, cost compliance, the impact of events, risk remediation cycle time. That just hits home with me. I like that one. Risk prediction accuracy, KPIs, participation rates. I need another cup of coffee before I try and say that one as well. And then what about ERM process assessment? How do you assess the ERM program? I have gotten this question so many times in the last year about how do I know if I'm doing well or not? For the record, COSO has a training class. I was the principal author on that class. In that class, we built in how do you assess or benchmark ERM? There's a case in it, but you could do it. The answer is really here in front of you. But I get this question a lot. How do I assess? How do I benchmark ERM? How do I know if I'm doing it well? Well, here's the answer. Here's some brief answers. Well, you get audit or somebody to come in and look at it. I know several organizations that say, I'm going to bring in an outsider, or I'm going to bring in an insider, my internal audit department. Or look at the second one down, I'm going to participate as part of an ERM group, like the APQC benchmarking study or Professor Walker's ERM summits. So I'm going to network and learn from others. And I know some people that as they meet and progress in that area, then they reach out and say, hey, could we do a peer-to-peer? I did a peer-to-peer yesterday for a company on the West Coast where a friend of mine said, could they just talk to you for an hour? Could we just pick your brain about what they're doing versus what you're doing? Why? Because ERM people like to help each other and we're all trying to get better, right? So I'd encourage you to grow your network, grow your benchmarking, make some friends. This is the one thing I really hate about COVID. It'd be better if we could all just go get a beer or cup of coffee, whatever you're addicted to. I don't know what it is, or just go have a nice glass of refreshing water after this webinar. But we can't do that. Hopefully we can do that sometime in the near future. Another way to do this is we'll look at COSO and ISO. I'll show you an example of that in just a moment. Compare what you're doing to what the best frameworks in the world are out there. I'm a member of the COSO ERM committee. If you don't like it, please don't send me a nasty email. A little bit of it is my fault, but not all of it. We had a big group, right? So compare yourself, benchmark against those, and then get feedback on the next one, right? So I like that. Maybe get a review or an audit or an SME to come in and look at it. Use a maturity model. We'll show you some examples of that here in just a moment as well. Oops, hang on, it went one slide ahead. I forgot to wait for the delay. And here's just some examples. The IRS and ONSEMI are using maturity models. IRS is also using the COPs you see in the middle there, community of practice. They have an index on risk culture. I love that, been working on that in class as well. And the AARP, ask the board, self-assessment, tell us what you think. So there are a lot of ways for you to try and get some feedback and know what you're doing. And notice what the IRS has done here is on the left-hand side, they put the ERM framework components. For the record, those on the left-hand side are part of the COSO framework. And then they've said, well, what does that look like at the IRS? So if it's governance and culture at the IRS, what would that mean? It would mean we would provide a safe environment and forum for risk to be identified. Risk appetite is established by the SET and cascades through the business unit. So you could take those benchmarks, you could take those frameworks from COSO and ISO and imagine what they look like at your organization and then see if they are actually at your organization. So that's just great thinking on their part. What are the benefits of ERM? A ton, right? Better decision-making, risk avoidance, reduced insurance, more informed risk awareness, et cetera. General risk awareness and understanding, more targeted, I love that one, 36%, more targeted organizational and business strategy. And at the bottom, new business opportunities. I emphasize that a lot in my strategic risk analysis class that I'm teaching this semester. We spend several classes on looking for opportunities. And this is another great slide here. To what extent do you agree with the following? Our ERM program is driving value, and the strongly agree is on the right, not the left in this particular case. So look at that. 44 and 38% say it's driving value. That's amazing. So most people say it's driving value. 76%, most people say it's effective. Most people say it helped them respond, the third one, to the effects of the current pandemic, 72%. So all reasons Why, I would probably say, if you're sitting at home today, go to your boss and say, Professor Walker says I'm underpaid. You probably are, in my opinion, considering when you look at these numbers. So it is effective. Well, so everything is not perfect though. So we still have some room to improve. So let me just point out a couple of things, right? So on the left-hand side, this is kind of the oops question. So you can read the long question there, but I'll just call this the oops question. Have you had a large risk occur within the last 2 years that you had not previously identified, not counting COVID? And the answer is, oops, 58% have. So we need to admit that no matter how perfect we try to be, sometimes things are going to get through. We need to study those, learn from those, hopefully make sure it never happens again, but it does happen, right? You will never completely control the world as much as some of us try to do that. I've raised 3 kids, and I know I never controlled them at all, right? I loved them as much as I could, but they were just kind of wonderful kids that they're going to do what they're going to do sometimes. So hope my son's not on the call today and just heard me say that. But you're going to have some oops, right? One way to think of this is, if you think of those 3 boxes, I like to think of them as circles: the knowns circle, the known unknowns, and then the unknown unknowns. One of your jobs is to make that unknown world as small as possible. So if you do your job really well, the unknown unknowns in your organization's life should be a smaller set. So that's a good way to think of it. You will never have perfection, but if you can make that one smaller. And then the known unknowns, if you could learn as much as you can about those and push those into the knowns, then you're getting better as well. So that's one way to think of it. And you see this on the right-hand side, where we say, for a large risk that did occur, did you assess it correctly? And the good news is that a lot of the organizations did, but we saw 7% say no and 1% say absolutely not, and 13% couldn't say. So a lot of companies are saying, well, even when one did happen, we got to get better on that assessment part, right? One of the great points, again, so many good companies in the study, one of the companies in the study pointed out as well, I think it was Highmark. One great way to think about ERM is that if we're always identifying and assessing the risk after the fact, then it's a little bit more, and I don't remember the phrase he used, so I'm going to make it up just a little bit, and I hope I'm close. And if John's listening today, he can send me an email. But I think he said it like this: the further you are away from the decision, the less it is really enterprise risk management. And then I'm going to add, it looks a lot more like enterprise risk awareness after the fact. And so what Highmark's philosophy, which I applaud, is the closer you get to the decision, now you're identifying the risk sooner, and it's a little bit easier to manage at that point in time. So that's just wise advice from some of your colleagues that are out there pushing the buttons and trying to get a little bit better. We did sort of ask this one big question, and I like this question. We tried to split the data. This is my academic research side, and we're almost done, ready for any of your questions. But we tried to split the data in this particular area, and we said, well, what do the top performers look like? So we kind of took the sample of who said they were a top performer and just split it. Interesting results, by the way. The top performer said, I'm going to start from the bottom. So the companies that told us that they felt like they were a high-performing organization, we noticed that when we looked at the answers to all their other questions, they tended, and I believe these were all statistically significant, by the way. APQC has great people on staff that can verify that for us. But anyway, we noticed that those people were more likely to say they're going to increase their ERM activities. So they saw the connection, they saw the dots, they saw the lesson, and they realized we got to get better. So COVID taught us maybe some things where we were vulnerable, things we didn't see, things we weren't ready for. We're gonna increase ERM activities. And then in the middle, high-performing companies, again, statistically significant, told us that they're going to get better on the emerging risk, right? I have a simple little white paper that we did from one of our summits on emerging risk from about 2 years ago, if you want to read that, or I can send that to Rachel as well and she can post it. But companies are trying to get better on the emerging, and I might add even the unknown risk. And lastly, high performing companies tend to have executive level champions. So somebody at the top has got to support you, that they can't challenge everything in a bad way or massage to where it's meaningless, whatever risk you come up with. You got to have buy-in from them. You got to have them as a champion, because this is a really large, important job. So I want to close by just saying we've covered several areas. And we had some great companies. We covered the structure, we covered the processes, and lastly, we covered benchmarking, ERM effectiveness, and ERM assessment. And when I'm not teaching class or doing webinars or hanging out with some of you practicing ERM, I do empirical studies. Oh, and thank you for forwarding to the next slide, Madison. I appreciate that. I do empirical studies. So just to let you know, I can mathematically prove to you that ERM adds value. I really can. It's really boring academic empirical papers, but I'll just explain it this way. I can put as a dependent variable using not some of the people on the news, but using the real scientific method. My dependent variable is value. And then I can load up various measures of how well organizations are doing ERM. And then I run the models with all sorts of econometric controls and tests. And guess what? Duh, right? Surprise, surprise. The better you are at ERM, the higher value you have in the organization. That should not surprise any of us, right? I have a friend of mine who just retired young, by the way. I'm so jealous. And she's one of these people that she drinks these health drinks that are so gross to me, I would gag if I tried to swallow some of those. But there's all this healthy stuff in there. She works out all the time. She sleeps right all the time. She's just this, she drives me crazy. She's so healthy. I'm over here drinking a beer and I forgot to work out today and I'm working too much. And look, in the long run, odds are she's going to outlive me and be healthier than me, right? It just makes sense that if you do all the things in life right, I know it doesn't happen for everybody. I've told this story before. You've all heard of the 110-year-old grandma that drinks whiskey and smokes all her life. Yeah, I know, but that's the exception, right? Big picture, the better you are at trying to improve your life, the better your life is going to be, right? Same thing in enterprise risk management. That's what you're trying to do. You are trying to help your organization be more successful. And what I'm suggesting to you today is they really need you to do that as well, because none of them were trained in this area. And this is an incredibly important area. And now Madison and Rachel, I'll shut up and take a breath. I don't even know if I took a breath in the middle of that. See, this is why my friends in New York make fun of me. They go, you talk faster than a New Yorker. Maybe I do now, I don't know. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. That was a great presentation. And just a reminder to everyone on the line, if you have any questions, we are going to get started with Q&A, so be sure and submit those. And we'll get started with our first one. So for an organization that is still more in the reactive, ad hoc, or siloed phases of ERM, how do you recommend they build a business case for ERM? And how do they determine who is the most appropriate owner of ERM, and what are the pros and cons of different owners? That was long, so we can start with the first part. For an organization still more in that reactive phase, how do you recommend they build a business case?
So is this for me or Rachel or both, or just checking?
Well, I'm directing them all to you. Sorry.
Okay, so how do they build a business case? So I would do a couple things. I'd give them the slides and some of the outputs from today. Really, the answers are in the slides. We saw how people get buy-in. Some people will jump in and give you the support and let you do what you want, depending upon the approach. So some people you have to show them. I can share all this with. There are a lot of laws, unfortunately. There are Department of Justice guidelines. So some people you have to scare. You have to get them. You have to show them the law. I don't know. And then other companies, you have to do things like we're talking about today and share. Well, other companies have made a lot of progress, and this is the way you add value. And I think you got to sell it correctly in the sense of you are trying to help them make the company more successful, right? So you've got to find out what pushes the buttons in your organizations, whether it's if they see the law. Like I know lawyers that if I showed them those laws, they would freak out. Or if I showed them some of the big lawsuits. Unfortunately, if you don't know this, there's more and more lawsuits over bad ERM coming about now. So you got to find out what's gonna motivate them. Maybe my study. I honestly think I used to be naive enough to think that people invited me into maybe their boardroom or their C-suite because I had this amazing amount of knowledge. I think they're half the time, the reason I get asked to do a talk is to get buy-in. So do you need an outsider? There's so many great consultants in this area. Find somebody that can position it and sell it. And I would say, again, what motivates them? That's probably the big one.
Awesome, thank you. So then The next part of that was, how do they determine who is the most appropriate owner of ERM, and what are the pros and cons of different owners?
Yeah, so there's something called the 3 lines model. It's no longer called the 3 lines of defense. I know some people that love that and some people that hate it, but if you've never looked at that, whoever asked that question, take a look at it. The IIA recently updated that. It's called the 3 lines model. And it's pretty clear that the owners are going to be the business units or the organizational units, right? The ERM person, the auditor can't own that stuff, right? It's got to be the business owner. And that model very clearly points that out. When you get to the really big risks, like the strategic risk, that's where you get to, it's the CEO and the board, really the CEO that's going to own some of those bigger risks with oversight from the board.
Yeah, and I think on that one, Dr. Walker, I may be wrong, but I think the intent was like the leader of the program, the ERM program, and determining, like, you know, we saw that slide with the results and it was kind of all over the place. But if you were starting it from the beginning, in the ideal world, who would be, where would the leader sit? And I'm thinking, you know, more in the strategy with the, you know, the reporting to the CEO and board. But go ahead and comment on that if you have additional.
Yeah, sure. So in the early days of ERM, people, I'm going to use say this in a bad way, people dump this on the chief audit executive. I don't think that that's the best solution anymore. I have good friends who are chief audit executives, and this is part of their job. That's fine. If I'm starting from scratch, I like it going through the CFO's office. I think that that's probably the better position. Why? Because the CFO's got their hands on all the resources, all the data, they're connected everywhere, but it's gonna be different for each company. I don't have data on this in front of me right at the moment, but I would say the most for bigger companies, they tend to probably go through the CFO's office. I think that that's a reasonable way to do it. It kind of varies by company, though. I think we had on a slide, Rachel, some companies think strategy, some companies think the internal audit's office is the right way to go. So there are some internal audit guidelines out there that do limit, maybe limit's not the right word, but influence what the chief audit executive can do. So just be aware of that. But my personal preference is the CFO's office.
Thank you. So our next question, if you were creating a blueprint for an ERM program from scratch at an organization, what would a best practice structure and governance look like?
Well, that's the paper I'm writing on right now, so I could spend hours answering that. So the question was, if I were doing a blueprint from scratch, right? Well, so to me, I think the short answer, because we're almost out of time, is that I would write a charter. I'd write mission, vision, right? Overall philosophy or approach. I would make it very clear, almost what the last question. I would make it clear what the roles of various groups are. So what's the role of the board? What's the role of the C-suite? What's the role of the chief risk officer if you have one? What's the role of the business owner? What's the role of it? So I would set up some sort of mission and charter and governance structure and let people know, okay, this is what it looks like. And here are the roles of the various parties. And here's how ERM feeds into that. So I would set up this visual and make sure that everybody's very clear on who's doing what, because it's going to be easy to get too much pushed on your plate if you're not careful and you can't get them to take ownership. So that's kind of my short answer.
Thank you. And last question we'll answer from a listener today is, most organizations now are creating the position of CRO, Chief Risk Officer. Should CRO be considered as the risk owner?
No. No, the Chief Risk Officer would own the process and the business units would own the risk.
Awesome, thank you. So with that, we will move on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Walker. That was really great. And as Dr. Walker referenced kind of throughout the materials, we have put together a research collection on our knowledge library as part of our mission to find and disseminate best practices information. And so we've got some links here for you. First one there is our survey summary report. If you wanted to get a copy of the results from the survey, that is available free to the public, again, as part of our mission. The second link there is the collection that we put together. And we do have, I think, at least 2 of those case studies. We had permissions from those organizations to share those publicly, as well as some other materials that are available to the public. So take a look at that. And then the very last one there is a related collection that we have around risk in the finance function that has some materials around scenario planning, business continuity planning, and other questions that we were getting asked throughout the pandemic, that we curated some materials to help our member organizations with the questions and the challenges that they were asking. So we will be following up with a copy of the slides and the recording. And Madison has one other thing to say.
I was just going to add that when you go to access these resources, you will need to be logged into our resource library. And if you haven't already, it's a short form that you fill out with your company email, and then you can download all of the PDFs that are included.
Yeah. So thank you again, everybody, so much for attending. And thanks to Dr. Walker again so much for leading our project and for the great presentation today of findings. And also thanks again so much to our survey participants and the case study organizations that let us interview them. Without y'all's participation, we wouldn't have such a rich study. So we really appreciate it. Everybody have a great day, and please keep in touch with us as always with your feedback, and we look forward to continuing to connecting. Thank you. Bye-bye.